All right, in this talk, I'm going to discuss some installation follow-ups so that we can discuss other things you would need to know about your WordPress installations. All right, so these are the things that we're going to cover. I'm not going to go through every one of them, but you can pause and look at this and come back to it if you need to later. All right, so where do I develop? All right, so the first question that everybody always has is, do I develop my stuff on my local computer, my development server, or do I put it on the class server? Well, the answer is sort of twofold. You have to turn your work in on the class server, so it might be easier just to develop in the cloud if you don't want to develop in two places. You can develop on your local computer, but the thing is that if you only make that your only solution, and you're not also doing it in the cloud, just be warned that migrating right before the due date can be really stressful. It's just don't underestimate how difficult that can be. So my recommendation is to develop on the class server, and as you make significant changes, you're going to be backing up your files and your database on your computer. And then, like at the end of the project, you can migrate your project to either your local computer, or if you have your own hosting somewhere, you can migrate it to your own hosting. So you might be asking, what's the difference between backing up and migration? Well, backing up, it just simply means that, well, it can just simply mean that you download the WordPress files and your SQL database file to a computer, right? And you've got your complete backup. So it's the file system set, and the SQL file for your database. This process alone, though, it doesn't make the site live and functional on another server or computer. You just have the files. So what is migration? All right, migration goes one step further by making those backups functional on a different server, whether it's in the cloud somewhere, like if you have your own hosting, or on your own, it's supposed to say your own, not you own, on your own local host computer setup, okay? So how do you migrate? This is a really simplified answer, okay? Um, when I say really simplified, I mean really simplified. There's some different ways that you can do it. The way that I typically like to do it, because I have the fewest number of problems doing it this way, is I will download the WordPress files, to back them up, and then I'll place those files in the new server's web file folder. And then before I import the database into the new server, I'll go through that database as a text file, and I'll change all the pathways in many places of the database to match the new pathways for the new server. And then lastly, I will import the modified database onto the new server. And I'm going to show you later in a totally separate tutorial how you can do that. Don't worry about that just yet. Okay, you've got enough going on, but you don't have to deal with that yet. So backing up WordPress, right? We've talked about this before. You have your files in your database, and I know I sound like a broken record and it's redundant, but there's a reason I'm kind of harping on this. It's because every semester, there are people in the class who don't back up their stuff properly, or they just sort of underestimate how important these projects are going to be to them later for their portfolios, or they just sort of are kind of checked out and are not really paying attention to how important having both of these things are. Let me reiterate this. Without having both of these, you might as well not even have a website at all. You have to have both the files and the database. If you back up only the files, you'll have to completely rebuild your entire site. This is basically like not having a backup at all. If you back up only the database, you'll have to reconstruct all custom plugins, widgets, styling templates, themes, and media resources that you uploaded to the site. I mean, either scenario is terrible. So depending on how big the website is, of course. But I would almost rather have the database backed up, than have the files backed up, because sometimes it's easier to reconstruct the files than it is the database. But either way, you need them both. Okay, so for a full tutorial on backing up the WordPress files and the database, you can go to this. This is a short link, but it takes you to the video tutorial that you should have already watched. But if you didn't, go ahead and watch it. This is the last part of the last set of demos that you watched. But yeah, this will help reiterate how you're supposed to be backing everything up through our cPanel or through FTP. All right, so I want to reiterate and do a recap really quick on those WP core files. We talked about this again previously, but really quickly, I'm just going to remind you, the WP core files are everything in the WordPress folder except your site's unique files. And those unique files are the htaccess file, which is a hidden file. That's why it has a dot in front of it. The wp-config.php file, also very important. And then your WP content folder. That WP content folder is going to have like your themes, your plugins, your uploads, like so all of your attachments and stuff that, you know, picture files and things like that that you uploaded. Okay, those are going to be the only unique things. You will customize your unique files and folders as you build your site, but you should never, ever customize the WP core files, which I already said is everything except for those unique files that I mentioned. WordPress has such frequent and important updates that, you know, can break your site if you customize those WP core files. You should just definitely not touch the core files, because if you customize something that ends up being an important change to your website and you've modified one of the core files, as soon as an update comes along, it's going to wipe out all those changes, and you're always just going to have like a broken site. There are ways that if you want to customize an existing theme, what you can do is you can make a child theme. But that, again, a child theme is going to be stored inside of your WP content folder. Okay. All right, so we need to talk a little bit about deleting and restoring database tables. So now that we've discussed backups, all right, let's see how we can delete database tables. And it's supposed to say and restore them. It says and restoring them, but it's supposed to say and restore them. But what we need to do is first we need to get the newest SQL dump, and basically that's just the backup of your database. So anytime I ever do backups, let's say that I've been really good about backing stuff up, and I made a backup last week maybe of my WordPress installation, and then I've got that backup and I've got my files. Well, anytime you're gonna really and truly do major maintenance, and you need to make a new backup, you should make a backup right before you do anything, right? Because who knows, especially if other people have access to that WordPress site, the data could have changed in the database, and so you should definitely back it up. The other thing too is every once in a while, WordPress will do auto updates if you don't update it for long enough. Anyway, make a SQL dump file right before you delete and try to restore anything, okay? So here I am in my cPanel, and I'm going to go over here where it says databases, and I'm going to go to phpMyAdmin. And the reason I'm going to show you this is because you can also use the same technique, same method on your local computer as you can through the cPanel using phpMyAdmin. If I were to do just a regular cPanel download of the SQL file, then that experience would not translate to what you have access to on your own computer for like your local development package environment. So anyway, we're in cPanel, or excuse me, we're in phpMyAdmin. And if you go to the database that you want to use, right, I want to go to student SD places. So you want to actually click the name of the database that you want to use, because remember it issues that use command. So in the breadcrumb trail up here, it needs to have student SD places or whatever you named your database. All right, so yours will be whatever your account name is, underscore whatever, right? If you're doing this on our cPanel server, most likely, right? So you see all the tables that we have that are showing up there. And what I can do at this point is I can go over here to export, and I've shown you how to do this before, but we're just going to really quickly do this. And I'm not going to do custom, I'm just going to click on go, All right, and then I'll download this. Ideally, what you would really be doing is downloading it to your desktop, or excuse me, downloading it to, you know, a place where you also had your files and stuff. But right now, I'm just going to really quickly show you how you can, you know, delete tables and restore tables. That's really the only thing I'm going to be doing. So I'm just going to download the SQL file straight to my desktop. So let's do that, as make sure it says SQL file here. Save it, and then what I'll do is go to my desktop, and here's my SQL file. Now I'm going to right click it, and I can open it with a number of different things. I'm going to choose um, text edit. I'm on a Mac, and so I'm going to choose text edit. If you're on Windows, you can choose like Notepad or something. Anyway, so okay, for right now, we're just going to take a look at this, though. I just really want to quickly show you anything that has, for instance, 2 dashes in front of it. That's a comment. So that's the way that SQL reads comments. So the SQL service, whenever it goes to import this file, it's as you know, to basically recreate all the tables in its data, it sees these 2 dashes as something it should skip over. So where it says database, and then in these little tick marks, it says student SD places, that's just for us to know. Basically, it's just telling me what the original name of the database was, but it's not actually telling me to create a database anywhere. If you look here, like for instance, this is a set of commands where it says create table if it doesn't exist, and then it tells me the name of the table in these tick marks. And then it tells me the structure, so it'll give me the name of the column, like meta ID, comment ID, meta key. These are all column headers, okay? And then the stuff that follows it, basically what it's doing is it's telling it, when it's creating the structure of that column in the table, it's telling it what data type to be, right? And big int is a big integer, okay? And it tells me how many spaces or how many digits that big integer can have. Varchar is variable character. It means that it can be basically any kind of alphanumeric character, and it's giving me a limit of 255 characters. Anyway, there's all this little stuff. You don't have to understand this, but I don't want you to be scared of this, and I want to sort of demystify it a little bit. Right, so this is the structure, you know, so it creates the columns and then it puts the data types in. But then you see it says, okay, that it's dumping the data for SD comments. All right, so this is SD comments that it just created, and now it needs the data. So it's saying, first create the table, okay, and now we're going to insert into that table basically all the records that it had previously, right? And then I'm not going to go into all of the syntax here, okay, but what you do need to realize is that you should look, if ever you wanted to just, you know, do one table with, you know, if you needed to restore one table with one set of data, you shouldn't just get the structure, you should also add the query for the data as well, all right, so that you aren't missing data. So anyway, that's kind of what it does, and you can see it has all these different pieces of information, and it looks kind of daunting at first, but you know, don't worry about it. It's really not that daunting, to be really honest. Okay, so this is the file, and you'll notice, like I said before, that it's actually saying in the commands to create tables and to insert records into tables. So basically, when I did a dump, all it did was it recreated the file in such a way that it can recreate itself, right? So anyway, so that's what that looks like. Now let's just go back and we're going to import it. Okay, so first we need to get rid of our tables though. So I feel fairly confident. And the other thing I want to show you too is it's going to do the dump in the same order. Quite typically, it'll do the same order as the tables are listed here. And if you really have something that is absolutely critically important, you know, like on a live production server, and you're like in emergency mode, and you know you have to restore something, one of the things that you should do before you delete all the existing tables, and this is like where it might be like a super important thing if it's your job, you know, and you're getting paid to do something, is that you might want to take a look at all the tables and make sure that every table that is represented here is also represented in that same file. And if we scroll to the very bottom of this file, I'm just going to grab this, the scroll bar, and then you'll see down here at the very bottom, we have SD users, and it's inserting into SD users. So I feel pretty confident that it got everything, okay? All right, so now what I want to do is I want to click on SD places, make sure that I'm using that database. And I'm not going to actually delete the entire database. I'm just going to empty its contents, right? So what I can do is I have all of these different tables inside of that database. So if I come down here and say check all, and then where it says with selected, I can choose to drop them. Okay, and it is going to double check and say, are you sure you want to do this? Because the minute that you say yes, you cannot get it back without that backup. All right, this isn't like it puts it in the trash can, but it's still there in the trash can until you permanently delete it. It's not like that. It's gone. Okay, so just so you know that. So I'm going to go and, oh, before I hit yes, all right, I want to show you something before I commit to this. Let's just jump over here and let's go to that website. So we'll go to my website and we'll go to SD Places and take a peek at it. This was the website that I had last backed up in my example. Okay, and so this is what we had here. And of course it didn't really matter. But now let's go ahead and I'm going to commit and I'm going to say yes. Okay, tables are all gone. If I come here and now I refresh this page, look what it does. Bing. Okay, so what it's doing right now is it's trying to restart my installation process because it thinks that I don't have a current installation. And I have a troubleshooting guide. It's a migration guide, but I do have it. It's available on the website. I'm not going to go through all of the troubleshooting steps because I have this handy little guide that I made. But basically, what you're seeing right now is that you're not getting a connection error. It's actually connecting to the database. And so that means that because it's connecting, well, my WP config file is there, so that's not a problem. So if I were to click on continue, for instance, the thing that's going to do is if I click continue and it were to give me any kind of other error, then I might have some other problem. But now what it's doing is it's taking me straight into where it says to give it a site title, create a user, my email, and so on, right? So what it's doing is it's going to try to get me to recreate those tables again. Okay, I don't need to do that because I already have my backup. You know, the thing is, I didn't really have anything important in that database to begin with. You know, it was just basically a generic installation. However, if I did have something important, you don't need to go creating this stuff because you're going to be generating a bunch of empty tables that aren't really going to have the content that you need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back here and I'm going to click on import. Click where it says browse your computer. You're going to choose that file that's on your desktop. It's called student places or student SD places. Open it. And we're going to go ahead and hit go. Okay, and it'll come back saying that it's been successful. Now, if I come back over here, I don't want to hit refresh because it's in the install stage. But what I can do is I can get rid of everything after the root level of where my installation is, which is the SD Places folder. I can delete that and I can just hit enter up here. Now, before I do that, I just want to remind you that, you know, if you see this screen where it says information needed, if you see that at a time that you're least expecting it, then don't like throw your hands up and, you know, freak out and run around in circles. Like hunker down and try to figure out what's going on. Okay. And if you need to contact me, feel free to. Anyway, but let's just go ahead and hit enter. And then you'll see that it loads all those tables, right? It's able to connect again. Okay. So I want you to do that maybe a time or two and play around with it before you start putting in a bunch of stuff in your WordPress installation and getting like completely married to the content, because it's a lot easier to feel confident about doing this step when the stakes are really low, right? Like you can just start over if you have to. So I encourage you to kind of fool around with that before you start developing your website, and you'll feel a lot better about it in the event that you actually had to restore your database. All right, so now that you've seen how to do that, let's really quickly just go over something that a lot of people also kind of mess up a little bit. Actually, there's no little bit about messing it up. When you mess it up, you lose your data. So if you're using a local development computer and that's where you're developing your stuff, you need to understand about backing your stuff up on your own computer. So sometimes people will think, oh, well, I'm I'm on my own computer, so I don't need backups. Well, that's not true. What happens if you're on a laptop and your laptop gets stolen or your hard drive crashes or whatever, right? So if you are backing your work up to some other location, whether it's a different server or if it's on a backup hard drive, you need to know what you need to grab. So um, just remember that a lot of times when people are backing their stuff up, they're just backing up their user folder, like maybe they're backing up their desktop or their documents, but basically your home directory on your computer, whether it's Windows or a Mac. You need to remember that JAMP and MAMP development packages are being stored, everything is being stored in the applications folder that is not inside of your home directory, your user directory. So that's really important. And like if you ever reformat your computer or you get a new one, it's really easy to forget about transferring those files. And without them, all of your local host sites they're gone. They're not just useless, that they're gone. And your databases are gone if you were developing on your local computer. And a lot of times if it's your own computer, you probably have like some backup drive, like if you're on a Mac, you have Time Machine or something. If you're on Windows, you're doing some sort of full system backup. But if you are doing this, say, on a work computer, and you have an IT person who goes to back up your stuff, a lot of times IT people are going to assume that the only thing that's really, really important on your computer is going to be in your home directory. And so you need to make sure that you tell that person, if they're in charge of backing your stuff up, that they also need to be backing up stuff inside your applications JAMP folder. Okay. All right. I'm not going to show you where those are because you should know that, right? Anyway, but to transfer your localhost databases without doing a dump via phpMyAdmin, you absolutely must make sure that the MySQL service is stopped on your computer. To safely back up your files and databases, you need to stop both Apache and MySQL services. Apache is not such a big deal, but MySQL services, very big deal. You can damage your databases if you try to copy them while the service is currently using them. And that is a really normal thing to happen. It's not just like it can happen, there's a very good chance that it will happen. Okay, and then once you stop the service, you can safely copy the entire JAMP folder to some other location. Okay, so users, that's the other thing it's the last thing we're going to talk about, and it's really confusing to people who are new to this. So if you're confused about all the different users that you're having to keep track of in this class so far, it's really not that unusual to be a little bit disoriented at first. So let's talk about which ones they are and how they work. So these are the accounts that you really need to keep track of that we've been dealing with so far. You have a cPanel user, you have an FTP user, you have a database user, and you have a WordPress user, or users if you have a lot of people who have access to it. Let's talk about them individually. So cPanel, just as a recap, this should be something that you sort of understand, but maybe it's a little nebulous. But a cPanel user is a web hosting account user. With access specifically to that cPanel interface. And that person can do, among other things, create and delete databases using cPanel tools. They can upload files via the file manager. cPanel email settings, most of the time, like I don't think you guys have access this semester. Probably I disabled that. But usually for cPanel, you'd have access to email settings. A lot of times you would have access to changing the version of PHP. You don't in this class, but you would normally if it's your own hosting. You can view web traffic statistics, and you can also use cPanel's built-in backup and restore tools. All right, this is the cPanel user, and it is associated with a web hosting account. Okay. FTP user. All right. For one thing, I've actually forgot to mention it in this list, a cPanel user can also create FTP users, right? So you guys actually have that ability to create an additional FTP user. I think I gave you the option of making 2 users. But yeah, so they are different. Okay, so an FTP user only has direct access to the file system, and they can upload WordPress and other files via FTP clients like FileZilla or CyberDuck or whatever, or like if you use WinSCP or Fetch or whatever. This user cannot use the cPanel. It's not the same type of user. Now, in this class, at least the time that I'm doing this demo or this talk, your FTP username is going to be something like student@student.madmcc.org, whereas the actual cPanel username is just student, right? So those are 2 different accounts, and they have different privileges. Okay, your database user. All right, this user is granted specific privileges by the MySQL service to manipulate special databases or specific databases, right? And so this is like when you went to create your database, you also created a database user that had permission to use that database. Again, your cPanel user has the permission to create a database user, okay? But it's governed by the MySQL service, this database user, okay? And so that would be, for instance, like the database user that has permission to use the database for WordPress, okay? And then you also are going to have that WordPress user that you have to create during that WordPress installation screen, all right? And you can actually have multiple WordPress users, but the one that you had is just the first administrator WordPress user. And these users are stored within each WordPress's website database, all right, in the WP users table or whatever prefix you happen to use. But that user is stored in the users table. In WordPress. So special permissions are granted based on the user's roles so that they can use or manipulate that particular WordPress website through the WordPress web interface, okay? So in WordPress, you've got like an administrator role, you've got like a subscriber role, you've got a contributor, an author, an editor, right? So there are all these different roles that give different levels of permissions to use different tables, okay? So anyway, that is the end of this follow-up talk, and these are all the like sort of last little nitpicky things that I think are actually really important to know. I know it's a little bit overwhelming, it's a lot of information, but it's all really important information. So, you know, do your best to remember as much as you can, and that'll do it for this time.